I thought school taught me everything I needed to know in order to be successful. But in reality, school taught me how to learn so that I could learn more when I actually got a job. You know what I mean? But in terms of technical or trade expertise or skill set, I didn't really get that in school. It prepares you to be thrown into this environment where you've got pressure and deadlines and team members. And then you also have to manage yourself professionally. You have to manage what people think about you and perceive about you, both internally and externally.
Hello, and welcome to Working Your Way, the podcast dedicated to unraveling the journey of being authentic in the workplace. I'm your host, Sandhya Sudhakar, and today my guest is Justin Grant. Justin has had a very robust career in retail and merchandising, which, for those of you not familiar, includes everything from getting a product made to getting it in front of the right consumers. After the first few years of his career, he started really specializing in fashion and apparel. He loves the fast-paced and multifaceted nature of this work, combining data and creativity. And Justin used this love of this intersection to eventually start his own business, which he ran for several years before actually going back in to work for an organization in merchandising. We get into this transition in the episode, as well as how he uses his voice in a way that's really authentic to him, and how he finds his own balance between success and fulfillment. I'm excited to share this conversation with you. Hey, Justin, welcome to Working Your Way. I'm excited to have you on.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here.
I already know it's going to be a hilarious conversation, but we're going to talk about the different chapters in your career and what you've learned about yourself and about what you want out of work. But I'd love to kind of like rewind a little bit. And, you and I knew each other in college, and we both took our first, adult big person jobs out of undergrad, and you went into retail merchandising. So I'm curious, what drew you to the retail world in the first place?
Going to Indiana University in Bloomington, it's like if you go to IU, you have like three options: music, business, and what's the other one? What else do people do there? Pre-med, science, right?
Yeah.
I just kind of always saw myself doing something business related. I had no idea what that was. So I specialized in marketing. And I think that marketing is a very broad, general field. And there's just a lot of different ways to go. You can go brand, you can go digital. And my senior year, I took this, it was like Retail Merchandising 101 class. And I absolutely loved it. It was hands down my favorite class that I had in college. And so then at that point, I decided, okay, I'm going to go into retail. I was fortunate enough to get offers from a lot of different places, and then I landed on Target. And so that kind of is what got me there. But what's interesting is, it's just interesting how you just don't know what you don't know. So left IU, broke the speed limit all the way to Minnesota, ready to start my big boy job. And I think, what was my first job? I think I did like diapers. It was like diapers, like baby care. And then I moved over to like toilet paper and stuff. And, about 2 years in, I decided I wanted to explore fashion and fashion retailing. And so I left Target and I went to Abercrombie and Fitch. And that was like 2 years of like, let's just say it was a very dark time in my life. It was a very, just a really intense work environment. And I think that aside from the fact that I was working really long hours and it felt very thankless, in the bigger picture, there was not really a strong presence of leadership at the company. And so it was really hard. I was looking around, looking at who to model myself after. And there was no one that I could really grab onto. So I ended up going back to Target because I did miss Target. And then at that point, my career became permanently in the fashion vertical. So I did everything from like baby clothes to women's accessories to men's underwear, juniors. I did basically almost every single category within the apparel industry within at Target. And so I don't know if I answered your question, but that was really the arc of like how I got into retail and really what happened when I got there. But I was really fascinated with like retail strategy, and I was always really fascinated with the complete picture. Like I was never really interested in like a specific type of job or a specific
Mm.
type of role. Like my job is like I am the sourcing person or I am the pricing expert or whatnot. I really loved the merchandising, like buying function, because you kind of had to understand all of those things. And I really gravitated towards that. And I like to use the term, I think in the industry they use the term general athlete. And I actually think that's wrong.
Mm.
I actually look at retail merchandising as a professional triathlete, because not only you don't just need to understand enough to be dangerous, you actually need to understand enough that like if you didn't have anyone helping you, you could do it. So I've just always loved that. I've toyed in my career with I've been presented with, different specialty type roles within my career, and it just never really was enough to get me out of bed.
Mm.
Like being the merchant, being the business leader, being the hub of the spokes, it was what always just like really spoke to me.
I mean, I imagine those first couple of roles that you had at Target. I say I imagine, but I also know what those roles were like. It was a lot of numbers, right? It was a lot of like inventory management and data analysis and those types of things. So, like, when you said, you don't know what you don't know, it's like you think, oh, I'm going to go into retail and it's going to be, fun and exciting and trend forward, and then you're counting how many cases of diapers you're bringing into each DC. Like, was that a moment for you where it was like, what did I sign up for?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think I'm not the only one. I definitely was like, what did I get into? This is actually a lot, and it's a lot of execution, it's a lot
Mm.
of numbers, and it's a lot of systems, and it's a lot of responsibility
It was
to
a really important category.
a very important category. It's a very important
Yeah.
job, and when you think, and I actually, I was very overwhelmed because there is, I mean, anyone starting out in retail, I remember the learning curve is like 6 to 8 months, but then you have at least a 4 to 5 month learning curve for every job you take after that. So it's you're constantly adjusting, as you go through a career like this. But I will say, and I still see it today, when you're in school and you have that job offer, you really think they hired you to come in and turn the world upside down. When in reality, like, and they may lead you to believe that, but in reality, when you get there, you have to actually plug into what's already going on. You've got to plug into an existing process. You've got to plug into existing, layers of bureaucracy and red tape and approvals. You've got to plug into, whatever's going on with your vendor and supplier community. All of that stuff is already in works. So it's interesting when you see like younger people start jobs in retail. They just want to come out the gate swinging with like big capital investment recommendations, and it's like yeah, actually though, like you need to go place those orders. you know
Yeah, and so I mean, it was important to the company. It was, like you said, a lot of systems and all of that kind of stuff. Looking back on it now, how do you think about those early days in terms of like, maybe it's like, okay, you had to learn those things, or what did you get from those early experiences?
Oh God, I just I cringe at some of my experiences, to be honest with you, from like when I first started. But I think that what I get from it, or what I when I think back on it, is I learned I realized that I had so much to learn. And
Mm.
when you come from a good school with a highly rated program, you actually think you don't have anything to learn. You think you're there to bring all of you to the table, and you are, but there's a lot that you've got to learn and adjust to and whatnot. And you know, you don't know, like you get into a job, you don't know what a big deal is and what a small deal is. You don't know if you screw something up, you don't know if that was actually like a huge impact or not a huge impact. Like you kind of just have to learn these things, and that's part of that learning curve, and it can be painful. Like, and I just look back and I'm like, gosh, I'm so grateful at how patient they were with me and allowing me to learn and allowing me to fail and make mistakes, but holding me accountable to learning from those mistakes. I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I remember one of the marketing professors that I knew was like my, mentor for this program that I was in. And I was deciding between a job offer at P&G and a job offer at Target. And it was like, it was like the most dramatic
I
thing in my
remember
whole
when you
life, right?
were, I remember when you had those two offers.
And so it's like, oh my God, this is a life-changing decision, right? And I remember him saying to me, you're going to be overqualified for whatever job you start in anyway, so just pick one. And I was like, okay, well, fine, because to your point, like you want to do all this thinking and you have all this knowledge that you got from college, and they're like, you need to push some buttons and learn for a little while before you get to go use all of that. So it's funny that you say that, and I think that's probably a little bit of what he was alluding to is like just go start somewhere.
Yeah. And it's so funny because, now, like looking back, that your world is so small at that point in time, right? And then I've met people in my career throughout the years, the last 20 years, some of which have been successful and didn't go to college. And one of the things that I realized later was I thought school taught me everything I needed to know in order to be successful. But in reality, school prepared me socially and taught me, school taught me how to learn so that I could learn more when I
Mm,
actually got a job. You know what I mean? And
so
those are
true.
really the two things I got out of going to college. But in terms of technical or trade expertise or skill set, I didn't really get that in school. You have classes and projects and, programs and activities that simulate that, but it prepares you to be thrown into this environment where you've got pressure and deadlines and team members, and then you also have to manage yourself professionally. You have to manage, what people think about you and perceive about you, both
Mm,
internally and externally. And I will say that's what I learned from college. And I've had this conversation with a few people that are like, well, what did you get from your degree? And I'm like, tell you exactly what I got from it. Like that's
yeah.
what I got from it.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's like I didn't plan to come onto your show to talk about going to school versus not going to school. But it's just kind of like in hindsight, looking back 20 years, I'm like, yeah, that's what I got from it. It prepared me to be in the environment that I'm in now.
Justin shares the story of really loving this retail merchandising class in college and eventually really focusing on making it his career. I'd say most people's stories aren't that clear or linear. And I always marvel at how young people these days are expected to know what they want to do in their careers from a younger and younger age. Sometimes from their teenage years, from age 14 or even younger. I can't even remember where I personally picked up all of this, but for all 4 of my years in high school, I remember being very intentional about building up my, quote unquote resume with my grades and extracurriculars and taking on roles in clubs and organizations to work up to kind of leadership roles within these clubs, all to really set myself up to get into a university with a great business program. Now, obviously, I took a big pivot from marketing and sales and the commercial side of the business to what I'm doing now. But up to the point where I stopped all of it and changed my course, my path was actually really linear too. My actions in high school set me up for a great undergrad business program, and that gave me access to great entry level roles and some very successful companies that had great training programs. It's this kind of achievement autopilot that I've mentioned before. It's sometimes just really easy to see what that obvious next step is and take it without really questioning each one of those steps or the staircase that we might be on. But I really loved what Justin mentioned here as what he really got out of college was learning how to learn, learning how to operate in a system with deadlines, and learning how to work with others in order to accomplish those goals by those set deadlines. Now, I think the early stages of a career are kind of similar, but people can often go to these extremes. Either they think they're going to fully bring themselves to the work, or they think they're there to be a part of something. But really, the truth is somewhere in between. I think the balance is really important here. Bring yourself fully to the work, meaning ensure that you're in an environment where your identity isn't devalued or diminished and you can really be you. But know that every idea you have in those early days might not be a good fit. And this is where understanding that you are there to be a part of something is really important. Instead of trying to reinvent the wheel on day one, focus on learning and observing and understanding the context or the bigger picture of what the organization does and why they do it and how they do it, and then find ways that you can contribute. I think that these days, especially with the influence of social media, we kind of lose sight of how to balance multiple things at once. Be authentic and learn how to get things done within a system. And we often end up going really big in just one of those things and kind of get frustrated when it doesn't really work out very well for us. Okay, so let's get back to the conversation where Justin dives into one of the tougher chapters of his career. At that time, I mean, Target had this like best places to work culture. Like they were really known to be like an amazing work environment. And you left and went to Abercrombie, you ended up going back to Target. I'm curious, like, from this podcast is all about authenticity at work. Like, what was that? You said it was a really intense experience, like a really intense retail environment. What were those days like for you, and like what led you to kind of going back to Target?
It was both professional and personal. I'm really close with my brother who was in Minnesota, and being apart from him was just a little bit harder than I expected it to be. And I also, when I was at Abercrombie, despite the fact that, organizationally, I didn't align with like the company's values or lack thereof. I didn't quite have any synergistic alignment with that. And then I also really didn't enjoy the nature of the work that I was doing because it was it was less on the buying and strategy side, and I was really like elbows deep in like bottoms up product development, like working with suppliers and manufacturers in Southeast Asia and India and Bangladesh round the clock, dealing with language barriers and the intricate details of putting product together, putting apparel together, stitch by stitch, button by button. And I didn't quite align with that level of the work. I way more resonate on like the more customer centric strategy side of the work, and then what are the pieces we need to put in place in order to make that happen. That's my MO. And so it was kind of both. It was really professional, you know, a skills and goals alignment that wasn't there. The company values I questioned significantly. And personally, just personal relationships that weren't in proximity to where I was located at the time.
Yeah. Now they as a retailer have changed a ton since then. I mean, this was like the early aughts, right?
Yeah, they have.
And I'm curious, like, what do you think about them as a retailer now?
I applaud them for making the pivots that they did. But I will say they didn't have a choice, right?
Yeah.
So, they didn't have a choice. They had to become more inclusive. And then there was that documentary that came out a few years ago.
Right.
That was, and I will tell you, that was a pretty jarring experience watching that documentary because that was stuff that was going on when I was working there and I had
Yeah.
no idea. And I will say, that's a pretty gnarly like feeling to realize that because it's
Mm-hmm.
it's almost like I'm some kind of passive enabler, even though I had no real association with the inner workings of the stuff that was going on. But
Yeah.
by by working for that company and giving my all into the type of work that I was doing, I was more or less enabling it, and that sucks.
Yeah, that's gotta feel really heavy, and it was to me, it was, like, such a nostalgic documentary because I was like, "Oh, man, that took me right back to high school when I did not feel cool enough or skinny enough or whatever enough, right, to, like, shop at this or, like, rich enough, right, to shop at this store and in the mall." And so fast forward to going back to Minneapolis and going back in the context of the fashion merchandising or apparel, what was going back like for you?
It was a good experience going back. It was kind of like I had a 2 year sabbatical. I like it's like I lost my mind, went to this crazy retailer and worked a ton of hours, learned a lot, and most
Yeah.
importantly learned I didn't want to do that, and then was able to bring that experience back to Target, which I think in the long run benefited me there.
Yeah, in a way, even though that type of work that you were doing in the like real, like you said, the bottoms up product development and all the executional details, while that wasn't what you wanted to be doing or maybe what aligned best with your strengths, I have to imagine that that context and understanding that and having done that type of work made you so much better at what you then went on to do.
Absolutely. That's so true, Sandia, because like I said, and I say this all the time, I say it at work all the time. You don't know what you don't know. And I think that you know, I would never say any of the moves that I made were a mistake because I don't think there are mistakes when it comes to your career. I think that you are where you are at each point in time and there's a reason for it. And it's up to you though to see that side of that coin. It's you know but yeah, I definitely don't think there's any mistakes because I think that particular move did benefit me in terms of the skills I was able to bring to a career doing apparel retailing with a company like Target.
Yeah. And so in this next chapter of your career over that course of that 10 years, you're successful there and doing a lot more, like you said, that consumer centric trend forward kind of strategy work. What were the ways in which you felt like you were being authentic in your work and maybe what weren't?
Oh man, that's a loaded question. I will say authenticity at work has never really been a problem for me. But that's mostly I think because of my personality. Because I'm just kind of like I'm very outgoing, very talkative. I do have a filter. However, I'm not great at using it.
Or maybe you choose not to sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. I've always, so being myself at work has never really been a problem. However, I will say in a lot of my career, I have lacked some awareness about realities, being black, being gay. And and I haven't always, it's never been if I was ever in a situation like a conflict situation or a disagreement, or if I'm getting feedback on this thing or that thing, I never really stopped to think, hey, like, because there's been plenty of times where I've gotten feedback or I've had a conflict or something or whatnot, but I've seen someone else have a similar situation and it doesn't
Mhm.
quite go down the same way. And so I haven't always been like aware of those biases, but was I was kind of brought up to look the other way, to not even look for those biases. And I think so, I'm starting to be more in tune with that because those things are there. And I'm not saying, oh, woe me, I'm a black gay man, but that is real. Like that is absolutely real that those things exist. But I'm still 100% myself day in, day out. As I've gotten older, I'm better at not saying things. And honestly, I've gotten really good at at knowing when I'm about to say something and warning people about it.
At least
So
you can soften the blow of
yeah,
I'm going to say something really out of pocket right
yeah.
now.
Well, and it's not like really out of pocket, but it's really like, because in our world, if you're a person of color, it's largely unspoken that people want you to stay in your lane. But I have a lot of out of my lane things to talk about. And so I
Yeah.
will preface it. I just did this last week or a couple weeks ago. I said, I don't know if this is controversial or not, or I don't know if this is the right forum, but I'm just curious why. And it was XYZ, something work related. And
Yeah.
and it was kind of like, when I said that, it was kind of like, whoa, he just asked that question, but it's a really good question. We just didn't want to hear it. You know what I mean? So the
Mm-hmm.
room got like silent, and I was loving it.
I think that's part of your personality, right? Your charisma is you can kind of disarm people with I'm just gonna put this out on the table, right? You are who you are, and
Totally.
you're, like you said, outgoing and easygoing, kind of happy-go-lucky in a sense, where they're like, okay, I can receive certain things in a different way from you.
Well, and because it's coming from a really good intentioned, authentic place. It's coming from the spirit of making whatever we're doing better. But it's also like, hey, if I'm stepping on someone's toes, I'm going to apologize right now, but I do have a question that I think we need to talk
Yeah,
about.
I'm gonna give you the disclaimer, but I'm still gonna say the thing.
Absolutely. And I think that, like, I will say, I do think that that sort of like realness, let's get to it, and like let's figure this out and move the ball forward. I do think that's part of my professional brand. And so, in a sense, I guess, is it apologizing for who I am? Not really. But is it just kind of warning people, that like giving people a heads up that, like, hey, I don't want to blindside you right now, but I want to talk about this.
I think that's exactly the type of let me kind of communicate my inner experience to you so you know where I'm coming from. That is the type of communication range, developing range in your communication that we have to do as we evolve as leaders and move up in power structures and things like that. I just touch on this, but I want to pause here for a bit and dive a little deeper. How we communicate is so important to how we can be more authentic at work. Language is the most important way to bridge the gap between ourselves and others. The idea is never for us to conform to the same ways of thinking or talking, but instead, can we understand ourselves well enough to know where those gaps might be and to use our words to help communicate our intentions more clearly? This is the answer to how we can both be authentic to ourselves and be effective in how we communicate with others. For Justin, it would be inauthentic not to ask the difficult questions or the questions that will ultimately lead to uncovering a big issue or a big opportunity. And those things may not be in his direct responsibility, but it could be perceived as overstepping or infringing on another person's territory and cause some conflict. And Justin does it anyway by doing it in a way that creates that bridge, almost saying, hey, I know this isn't my area, but I need to point this out. And he leverages his personality, his friendliness, his positive demeanor to help make this point land. Oftentimes we think, I just have to keep my opinions to myself, instead of figuring out how we can help a message or a question land in a way that it can be received by those around us. So I'd encourage you to reflect on, where are you holding yourself back in communicating? Or maybe even, where does your communication tend to ruffle people's feathers? And how could you reframe what you're saying or use communication to bridge that gap so that you can still show up authentically and be an effective communicator? In your career, you had a stint where you worked for yourself. And what do you make of that experience now? Because as I understand it, you went to work for yourself as a stopgap or as a maybe temporary thing. So what was that like for you? What was that chapter of your career journey?
Yeah, it was, oh boy, it was a very good experience overall. And I will say, and I think that's one of those that's one of those things where, you know, I learned a lot, and most importantly, I learned that it wasn't really for me. But it's not something that I regret, because had I not done that, I probably would have said, well, what if I had done something like that, right? Well, now I did it, you know. So what I did was, it started out very organically. I started podcasting just for fun. I was just having some fun. I had some spare time. I'd been laid off from my role at Target. Me and like 45 other people all lost their roles. And I wasn't sure what I was going to do. What was interesting was, by that point, when I left Target in 2017, I had been thinking about leaving Target for 2 full years before that, but I just wasn't sure what it was going to be, and what I wanted to do. And when I left Target, I thought I was done with retail. So I was like, oh, I'm so done with retail. So anyway, in hindsight, I wasn't done with retail. I was just done with Target, you know.
Mm.
But I started podcasting for fun, and people started noticing, and then some people started asking me to help them with some projects for their business, and like sort of the marketing sphere. And I just started getting clients who wanted me to do things for them in the digital space. But they were all different jobs. It was like, one wanted me to build a website, one wanted me to, like, operationalize their small business, one wanted me to run Facebook ads for them, and one wanted me to do SEO and Google AdWords and stuff like that. So I just had my hands in all these different buckets, and I got really overextended really, really, really fast. And I rode that wave for about 3 years. And then, right when I was like, I knew I was overextended, it was during the pandemic. So I was just grateful to have work coming in. And then, right after that election, wasn't there an election in 2020? I think there was like an election or
I think I
something.
blocked it out. I'm
I
not
think,
sure.
yeah,
Yeah,
was there like an
there might have
election?
been.
Yeah, it was like, I don't know who's that guy. His last name
So
started.
anyway, it's November of 2020.
So
Yes.
yeah. So anyway, I received an opportunity to get back into retail with a really cool company, and I was like, yes, absolutely, I'm going to do this. So that was really kind of my experience. But I think I will say, if you're going to go into business for yourself, be really grounded in what you care about, because I think, because a lot of people go into entrepreneurship, and they just think cars, houses, money, freedom, like, and those things do come with it, down the road, but there's a lot of elbow grease that goes into that in order to make that happen. And so for me, when my business became a business, it was so far away from the thing that got me there in the first place. And the thing that got me there was something that I really cared about. And when it became a business, I cared nothing at all about it. And I did good work, but it wasn't, I didn't want that, or and like it and enjoy it, and I didn't feel any passion for it enough to be able to sustain my career for longer than the 3 years I did it for.
Yeah, you started podcasting out of personal passion and fun and enjoyment. And then people were like, oh, you're good at marketing. Like, how about this? How about this? And it's almost like your business created itself. You didn't sit down one day and say, hey, I want to be a marketing consultant for these, small and mid-sized businesses. It just kind of like evolved and emerged that way.
I didn't even know that field like existed. Like, I had no idea. And I invested too. As I saw this was happening, I was like, well, maybe I should learn about this. And so, I
Mhm.
invested in some coursework. I got certified with Cornell University, and I really committed to it. And I went all in. I spoke at conferences. I went to conferences. I had mentors. I was a student. So it wasn't just like something I did in my spare room. Like, this was, you know, and it wasn't like I was poorly trained, and therefore
Yeah.
I didn't have the skills to be successful in it. I was very well trained, and I was very successful in it, but it was literally draining my battery. And that's because I wasn't able to do anything that was natural to me. I was behind a screen, I was studying analytics all the time, running reports, like analyzing keywords, and I was just like, and God, the day I eliminated all of that and sold my business, sold off my client roster, and I shut down all my systems. Oh, it felt so good. It
Like
felt
huge weight
so
off your
it felt
back.
so good. It felt so good. And especially to knowing that it was happening because I was pivoting back to retail.
I have to laugh at what they might describe on TikTok as that millennial urge to turn your hobbies into businesses. Justin started out doing his podcasting for fun, and it eventually led him to creating a business that brought in revenue. And he did it really successfully for several years. But first, one, I don't think that monetizing our hobbies is usually the way to go. Because for one, it takes the joy out of something that we were just doing for ourselves. And when we start doing it for other people and needing to make money from it, it changes into something else. And two, I think if you're going to start a business, Justin's point is a very great one. Think about what you want to do, something that you love, something that fuels you, and create your business out of this. Because doing something as an entrepreneur, just because you know it's going to be lucrative, is a very quick road to burnout or creating that pressure or burden of needing to keep it going, even though it's really draining you. And you can hear the relief in Justin's voice when he finally shut it all down. Okay, let's get back to the conversation. I'm curious, how did you know this opportunity that came up to step back into retail to go work for an organization again? How did you know that that was the right opportunity for you?
Because so this one in particular, I got offered to work for a retailer it's a small retailer based out of Minneapolis, but very well known throughout the world. And they're in a lot of publications in like, men's periodicals, magazines like GQ, and like they've been named like International Men's Retailer of the Year before. But it was a really unique job that was really hard to come by. And when my name got thrown in for that, I was just like over the moon because that's just the kind of job you don't get unless someone knows you. I'll probably have there was probably down the line some other opportunity that's super duper rare, but I knew that that was a very rare opportunity that I had to take. And so, yeah, it was really cool. It was really cool.
So at this point, like, what had you learned about yourself in terms of like what values are important to you in jobs and careers and things like that?
Oh my God, a lot. I had learned that number one, I'm a team person. I'm not an individual contributor. Working with a team is what really, because I not only can I not do everything, but I don't want to. So I'm definitely a team person. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing, when I combine like my collective experience from all the different companies that I've worked for, including working for myself, I think having strong peer relationships and strong peers to lean on and strong leaders to look up to is super critical for me. And so I've been alone on the island when I worked for myself. I've been in environments where the leadership is not strong. I've been in environments where my peers are not strong. And that's both, that's happened at Target from time to time because people change over. And so that's super duper critical for me. And then I think the third thing is an environment where I feel completely comfortable being myself and not the myself that wants to say anything I want to say or do anything I want to do or behave any way I want to behave, but a place where I feel like comfortable enough to, express who I am and and I don't feel like I need to hold back on feedback or, a place where I feel safe. And so I think that's what I would say I've learned in terms of what would be the right working environment for me.
Yeah. And so in this chapter of your career, now you're working for a larger retailer and kind of back in merchandising, what are your priorities when it comes to like your work life? You know, maybe not necessarily like, oh, I want to get to this level in my career or things like that, but the bigger picture.
I think what's most important to me now is that I'm not tethered to my work. And this goes back to the journey of coming out of school and getting, you know, I think that if you work for a big powerhouse company and brand like Procter and Gamble, Target, you run the risk of that becoming your identity. And and I saw this a lot, and I think I was guilty of it too. I like, oh hey, how are you? Oh hi, I'm Justin. Oh cool, what do you do? Oh, I work for Target. Let me tell you all about it. You know what I mean? And and it's like, why? I just met someone and I'm talking about Target within like 2 minutes. Like, what else is there to me? So in terms of that balance, I'm definitely, I'm not, one of my goals is to not be tethered to work, and I'm happy that to say that I'm not anymore.
Yeah.
I'm an individual, and that's separate from what I do for a living. Now, do I care about what I do for a living? Absolutely. Am I completely invested in it? Yes, when I'm working.
Yeah.
When I'm not working, I'm not thinking about work. I'm not, of course you sit around, you have ideas about work or something, or you maybe get an idea jotted in your phone or something and put it away, but I'm not obsessed with work. It does not have any significance over my personal identity and my personal value in this world. You know what I mean? And I think that's what's
Yeah.
most important to me now. I think one of the things that I really need to get out of work is significance. And I think that when I say significance, I mean that the work I'm doing is meaningful to me in some way, or the impact, there is some impact to the work that I'm doing and what that has. Like right now, I will say, like, I work for PetSmart now out in Arizona, and working in the pet category, I I see and I know, being a dog owner, dog parent myself, I know how important pets are to people's lives. And because of the work I do, I feel like I'm some kind of facilitator of that kind of joy. And and that is significance to me. However, I'm not going to walk out of my house and go to some stranger on the street and start talking about PetSmart like I would have done when I was 23 about Target.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's the distinction that I hear is like I do still want and need to have a sense of purpose in my work, but like my career is not my purpose, and it doesn't, it's not my identity.
I agree. And I think, as I was thinking about us having this conversation, I was thinking about myths. One myth is that you have to be totally over the moon fulfilled with the work that you do. And the reality is you don't have to be. And it's not a promise. Do some people get to experience that? Yeah. Do some people not? Yeah. And is either okay? Yeah. And so I think that's a myth that people have, is that, I'm just not fulfilled in the work I'm doing right now. I think I could be doing more. Like I just, you know what I mean? Like, or it just doesn't really like
Yeah.
leverage my strengths and what I'm like really like, all of that talk is just code for like, either I'm over it, or I hate it, or I don't want to be there, right? Like, and I think that, now granted, if the place is totally emotionally draining and toxic, or if the work is like so menial and you're completely overqualified, that's a totally different story. But I think with a lot of work in it, especially if you work for like a bigger company, there's probably a meaning there that you haven't quite recognized or acknowledged yet. And when you acknowledge it, then you probably need to determine whether or not that's enough meaningfulness for you. So that's the first myth, is that you need to be over the moon happy, within your job, because that's not true. And I think the second myth is job security is totally fake. It's job security is it's a made up concept that people that work for large companies trick themselves into believing that they have. And whenever I hear someone say they have job security, I'm like, no, you don't. Like, like look at the environment around you, look at the economy. In retail, one of the most secure jobs is buying and merchandising because that's the core of the business. Well, I was a buyer and I was laid off. So job security is a myth. I think that having side projects, hustles, think passion projects, I think that's so important. Not to say that it's going to replace your job one day, but I just think having that sort of freedom and having that outlet, it keeps you less tethered and your identity less dependent on your actual work. And then you can reposition it so that your work has some significance and some meaning, but it doesn't have as much control over you. And it doesn't dictate who you are as much.
It's a really personal choice how much you want to find purpose in the work that you do. There's some really great work done by Amy Resnowski about this. And I've referenced her work before on this podcast when talking about job crafting. In part of her body of work, she calls out these 3 different ways that we might orient ourselves to our work: a job, a career, or a calling. If you think about your work as a job, you might see it really just as a means to a paycheck and benefits. You're only doing it to support the things you want outside of work, like financial security for your family or time outside of work for your passions. You don't really care as much about what you do, more so that you can do it well enough to keep your job. If you think about your work as a career, you see your work as a place to advance, whether it's in title or status, like climbing the corporate ladder, or advancing your knowledge in a certain field or building up your level of expertise. And in this case, it needs to be something that you're good at and can grow in order for it to feel like you're progressing. Now, if you think about your work as a calling, this is where having a deep sense of purpose is really critical. If you're living out your values through the work you do, or the impact you want to leave on the world is largely coming through your work, it's really important to make sure that you're authentic in your work and really understand what drives you and motivates you. Now, I think it's important to draw the distinction between your work as your purpose and finding a sense of purpose in the work you do. The science of motivation tells us that we need to have some level of fulfillment coming from our work in order to do more and feel empowered to do so. So, if you're in the second or the third bucket, the career or the calling, and I'm guessing most of the people who listen to this podcast are, you'll want to think about how much you need to tie your work to a sense of purpose. A calling mindset will require a much higher bar for this than a career mindset. And so I want you to reflect on today, where do you find a sense of purpose in the work that you do? And is it enough? Is it maybe too much? Where do you actually want to be? Okay, let's rejoin the conversation where we talk about the distinction of purpose and identity when it comes to work. What we want to do is connect purpose with work, not connect our identity to our results. To me, I think about it as like, okay, if you have a retirement fund, like you want to diversify your portfolio. You don't want to have your entire retirement in one company's stock. Like that's just not a good thing to do, right? And having a pie chart of your life of like what is important to you, how do you spend your time? Like what do you care about, and what types of relationships, hobbies, like how are you taking care of your health, all those things, right? So it's like when you have this more balanced pie chart, you have perspective on, oh, this is just one little slice, this career thing. And to your point, this whole idea of job security right now, like I think we're witnessing it right now this year, last year, where, a Google as an example, like people are like, I'm a Googler, like that's who I am. And now I get laid off and I have an identity crisis because now all of a sudden, like my whole pie chart was Google and now there's nothing there. I have a reckoning of like, who am I now, right? Without this job. So I do think it's super important to think about like, how do we find a sense of purpose in the work we do, but not tether ourselves so tightly to that one company, that one role, that one type of work that we do.
Absolutely. And I don't mean to slander anyone that works for like a big powerhouse brand like Apple or Google or Target or even Amazon or Walmart to that level, Nike. But, you know, when you work for a large brand, it's kind of like a cult. And and I know, like, in the first 10 years of this decade, it was like, no, it is a cult and you need to get on board with that. you know, I think our attitudes and our culture has changed so much where, with things like hybrid work and flexibility, like, that's changed. I think that's changed that mentality a little bit. But, you know, I was like, yeah, it was a cult. And for a while I was happy to be part of it,
Yeah.
and then I grew up.
Then you realize, wait a
Yeah,
minute.
then I grew up. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, what's next for you, whether it's in your career, your personal growth? What does evolution for Justin look like?
Yeah, I really don't know. And what's interesting is I don't know and I'm comfortable with not knowing, which is another thing I would not have been able to say when I was 25.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I'm comfortable not knowing is because I've had a lot of different experiences and all of them have like led me to the next experience, and that it's literally like dominoes, you know what I mean? If not, like, if one was out of step, then nothing after that would have happened, right? And so
Right.
so I don't know what's next. I mean, I think that, retail is definitely kind of like, where I fit right now, and it's sustained my career all these years. But you never know. I'm doing some things on the side that I enjoy. I'm looking at sort of like getting back into my podcast or maybe taking it to YouTube or something like that. So I don't know, but I'm pretty open. I think we feel this pressure, right? I remember when I got laid off from Target, I had no idea what was going to happen. And literally, like, the day after, I had all these people, well, what are you going to do? Where are you going to go? Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, okay. First of all, I'm going to take a nap. And then when I wake up, I'm going to take a shower. And then I'm going to eat something. And then I'm going to sit down. And then I might think about it. like
Yeah.
I don't know. I have no idea what is in the cards for me. And I think that's kind of where I'm at now. I love my job and I feel like I'm doing a lot of really great, significant things. I'm really happy with my personal life. Moving from the Midwest to Arizona has been an adventure that I'm really, really grateful for. So I think right now I'm just kind of like living it up. And I'd be lying if I wasn't saying I'm not like thinking about those things. I just don't have any concrete feeling or direction about any of them.
Yeah. I think sometimes it's like we just let things emerge, and people like us in the past may have been like, I need to plan out every move and
Type
like have all
A.
the answers, and that's, I think maybe that comes with age and wisdom and just calming the f down. But like, just it'll happen the way it needs to happen.
Yeah, type A personality. Like, it'll get you successful, but it'll also get you in trouble.
Right, right. Exactly.
And I think, like,
Exactly.
I think for me, because, like, in retail, in my career, I've always been willing to work hard, wanting to work hard, and wanting to do a good job, wanting to have an impact. But I've never been incredibly ambitious and ambitious about getting promoted or moving up. That's
Mhm.
never really been important to me. The money, the power, the title, I've never cared about really any of those things. And for the longest time, I thought that there was something wrong with me because all of my peers did. I think part of the journey of growing up and is like really understanding what success means to you. And like for me, like success is, having a job where I feel great about the work that I'm doing. I feel that it's significant, like I said before, and being able to take care of myself and do the things that I want to do and have it support my life. And that's really successful in my opinion. And
Yeah.
but for a while I kind of no, I never was ostracized, except for I ostracized myself for not sharing
Yeah.
that same congruent mentality with a lot of my peers. Like, well, what's wrong with me? Why don't I want to be the vice president? Why don't I want to be, I have this or that or whatever? And then I learned that it's because it's not like that's not what success means. And my value system is just a little bit different than that.
Well, I think that's an amazing note to end on. And that is part of authenticity is like, oh, yeah, that's what other people want. And it's okay for me to want something different. So,
Totally, totally. And not living your life through the lens of other people, and having other people reflect the shadow back to you as something that you need to do differently or think differently or care about differently or whatever. That's all bullshit. That's not real. And that's not real and it's not authentic.
amazing. Well, thank you so much for being on. Thanks for having this conversation with me.
Thank you for having me. This was really fun to I feel like I think about this stuff all the time, but I never really like verbalize it. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about this.
One of the things I really love about Justin's story is his willingness to try things and readjust where needed. He left Target for another company and eventually he went back to Target. And he tried his hand at entrepreneurship and running his own business, and then decided to go back into an organization. And I'm sure he may go back out and do his own thing again one day. But he let himself try different things and return to what he already knew, but go back to it doing it in a different way. We talked a lot in this episode about purpose and work, how we can tie our work to a sense of purpose. And this is really so that we can be fueled and motivated and get energy back from the work that we're doing. This is a really core part of avoiding burnout. And yet, how can we at the same time, understanding that our work isn't who we are, create the right sense of separation between our identities and our roles and successes? So I'm going to link an article by Catherine Brooks. And if you're in the later millennial years, you'll remember this book called What Color is Your Parachute? She's the author of that. But in this article, she talks more about Amy Wrzesniewski's research on a job, a career, and a calling, and shares about how any job can be any of these three. It's really more about your mindset and the level of alignment to your values and strengths. I think what's important here is how intentional we are being. We can infuse more purpose into the work we do if we want work to be a place where we derive more fulfillment and motivation. But that is a personal choice as to just how much of that we want. So let's talk about where this goes wrong. We can derive a sense of purpose from the work we do. We can even tie it to our purpose for being here on this earth. But where this goes awry is when we over-identify with a role or a company, or we tie too much of our value as a human to how successful we are at work. This was that tethering that Justin mentioned. So the second resource I'm going to link is a very short talk that I did for an organization called Disrupt HR, and it's all about work and purpose. It's called Stop Taking Work Personally. And in it, I talk about why we tie our identities to work and what we can do instead, along with some questions to reflect on. So give it a listen, read the article, and spend some time evaluating where you are today, where you want to be, and what you could do to make that change.